Mark, thank you for joining us today. Kris Sunberg and myself. Kris is the Executive Director of Elder Voice Advocates in Minnesota. And Mark, I want to thank you for your willingness to share your views about your very accomplished career. Mark Kosieradzki, been in the legal field for 45 years. Over 20 years of these have been in the nursing home world. And Mark is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He's a nationally recognized trial lawyer who has handled nursing home cases throughout the United States. CNN featured Mark's work on sexual abuse in nursing homes. The Minneapolis Star Tribune described him as one of the nation's most feared elder abuse litigators. Together with his partner, Joel Smith, they wrote nursing home cases when caregivers stop caring. Welcome, Mark, and we have prepared a few questions for you. And the first question is, what has led you into the line of work related to abuse and neglect of older adults in long-term care homes?
I started as a trial lawyer 45 years ago, doing all kinds of work. And about 20 years ago, my partner, Joel Smith, and I were starting to see these cases coming in from nursing homes. And back then, nobody wanted to even handle them because, they were working on this, what I considered a stupid formula based on the law that's saying, well, a person's going to live 3 years, each day is worth X dollars, and therefore the case isn't that big, and therefore we can't afford to handle it. And, when I was younger, I kind of bought into that. And then as I got older and I started seeing these cases coming in, I'm saying, well, this is just wrong. What they're doing to these people is outrageous. And we just can't stand back and say, well, it doesn't make economic sense. And I started thinking, why doesn't it make economic sense? Because it should be something that is outrageous. And then I came up with this thought. It was the light bulb going off. It's saying it's not really that someone died, it's how they died. And it was not this isn't a natural process. And it's somebody made a decision that mama should die for money, that, they're cutting staff, or they're not providing services, or they're not providing equipment. And I started thinking, well, how is this happening? And then I realized we've got this business model, which is the business model of the healthcare system of the United States, which is front and center right now, is that we're using, the tragedies of people for corporations to make money. And we realize if people start understanding that, then they're going to start applying the law differently. And Joel and I started pioneering this concept. And it wasn't just the medical malpractice, it's what happened and why. And as a result of that, we started getting some successes. And it was rewarding, emotionally and intellectually. And for the next 20 years, that became probably 90% of my practice, if not more.
Wow. Thank you for that look back, that overview. It's fascinating. Kris, do you have any follow-up, or you want to ask the next question?
Well, just a follow-up. Thank you, Mark, because you have just verbalized exactly what our work is all about in Elder Voice Advocates. We've seen the heartache and the trauma that our families and the people who've gone through horrific issues. So and we're so thankful to have professionals like you to help us change this scenario. One thing, Mark, I'd like to just ask you, looking back on your career, you kind of given us some indications of what has been, rewarding to you, but could you tell us a little bit more about what do you find the most gratifying in your work over these many years?
One of the things that was really gratifying to me was, I mean, you can't turn back the clock. Bad stuff happens. And, you know, abuse, harm, death, you know, it happened. You can't make it right. But a lot of people, and the thing that really touched me is the people who came to us weren't coming for money. They were coming to us to say, what happened? How could this have occurred? And nobody would tell them because the healthcare industry would circle the wagons and hide what happened. And they really wanted to find out what happened. And then they're motivated. And I can't tell you how many people said, I just want to do something so nobody else has to go through this. And when you dig deep and you're going against these billion-dollar corporations, and they're hiring these legions of armies of lawyers to fight you, and we, as a small little shop of a couple of boys from Iowa, were able to penetrate that armor and find out what happened, tell the people what happened, and they get tears in their eyes and hug us and thank us. Man, that feels good.
You know,
So this
Mark,
is
can
really this.
Could
Go
I
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
just add some, you've touched something that's very personal to me because I was in this situation. My father was grievously harmed. I couldn't believe what had happened. When I talked to the facility, all I got were denials, were oh, who cares kind of attitude, to be honest. Plus, then just telling me, by the way, you need to get your dad's room cleaned out by the end of the month.
Yeah.
Well, after what had happened, that wasn't easy. But what I struggled with and what you're mentioning is accountability, because I could see this was an organization who wasn't going to change their practices. They were going to keep on doing it. Did I want money? Not really, but you know, but also I do know sometimes the only way change happens is if you hit the pocketbook. And when I talked to an attorney who said, well, you know what, your dad's life wasn't really valuable. You know, he was 89 years old. Did you depend on his income? No, but did he deserve this? So I
The
just,
lawyers who don't know what the hell they're talking about.
thank you.
That's, you know, that pisses me off.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and
So
you
what
have,
what I meant to say is I was about to say I think Kris has some parallels to draw here with her own experience and with Elder Voice mission, because a lot of families come to us and say, I don't want this already happened to my father, to my wife, to my spouse. I don't want this to happen to anybody else ever. That is their mission oftentimes.
That's a mission. If someone comes in and says, how much money am I going to get? I don't want that case. But if someone comes in and says, I need to know what happened, I want to make a change, those are the people that we represent. And
Mhm. Yeah. So and I have to bring a case, but I'm not gonna, as I asked you, I am not gonna obviously identify the family. What I will say is that years ago in Minnesota, there was a resident that was harmed severely, and he had to go through emergency brain surgery after he was harmed due to neglect. And um, the Minnesota Department of Health, which they're doing their best. There's good investigators, there's challenges, but it was unsubstantiated. And yet, one of the family members reached out to your firm, and and you brought justice. And I remember, I remember because I interviewed a family member for another project. And she told me that nobody listened to her. She was crying. Nobody listened to her except you guys. And so you bring also that level of
I did.
humanity and empathy.
Well, you have to care. I mean, you got to care about people. I mean, yeah, if you're just in it for the money, that's the wrong reason. You got to be there to do the right thing, and you got to care about people, and you have to have empathy. And and we prided ourselves on listening to everyone who called us, and we couldn't take every case that came. We weren't big enough, but we would have people send us letters and say, "You didn't take our case, but you listened to us, and thank you." And and I tell our staff that's who we are.
Right. Sometimes care homes that severely neglect older adults, they would not even apologize. They would hide behind kind of cold lawyer statements, privacy, or won't even approach the family when they come to the care home after they're receiving this shocking phone call. They won't even approach and say, "We're sorry," because they're guided possibly by lawyers who tell them, or the lawyers that defend the nursing will tell them, do not say anything about it.
Which
So
is
we're losing the
nonsense.
humanity there as well.
There's been a lot of research done that if they just come forward and say, "We don't know what happened, but we are sincerely sorry, and this is what we're going to do to find out what happened," and tell you that their lawsuits go down by 70%, just because they're answering. And that was a study that came right out of Minneapolis Children's Hospital here. And it's true. Just have empathy and care and say, "Yeah, I made a mistake, and I'm going to accept responsibility for it." That makes a difference.
I have to ask you, go ahead, Kris. Yeah.
I'm just gonna, add to that. One of the reasons we now have assisted living licensure on the books is just because of the facility where my dad was so cavalier, so uncaring, so unwilling to share information and whatever. Had they been treated me and my family with respect, given us the information and actually shown that they were going to do something about it, I wouldn't have gotten involved in this advocacy. I wouldn't have been a founding member of Elder Voice, and I'm proud to say we've accomplished a lot since then. So in some respects, it was horrid what their conduct was, but it also is helping us make change. And you are doing the same. Thank you. So.
You for what you've done. It's important.
All right. So the next question I have for you, I think you kind of shared about what's rewarding for you, but the next question is, what would you say are, 2 or 3 main lessons that you learned during this line of work over the years?
Well, I
know it's hard to
got a lot
capture that.
One is a lot of money is spent to hide not only what happened, but who's making the money. A lot of money has been spent to make it look like they're not making money so they can keep getting government tax dollars. And then they come in and it comes out. And I had one case where there were 150 subsidiaries running a nursing home. Just money is being laundered, or laundered is the wrong word, moved around through different entities. And it was just shocking, it was just shocking. I had to learn, and I had to learn why and what. I was stunned at the depravity of some people who work. And then I was also touched by some of the people who work in the nursing homes on how dedicated they were, but they had become victims also because they were being asked to do more than was humanly possible. So someone else could make a lot more money. And, a lot of these nonprofits are just nonprofits only in name. People making salaries of $4 million running a nonprofit, or driving the company Porsche Carrera, and And that was kind of disappointing to learn. But what I found was those people who start well motivated, they kind of go down two paths. Some just agonize deeply and and try to slug it out, but make mistakes because, you know, if you're asked to do too much and you're rushing, you're going to miss stuff. And then there's the other people who just become hardened and calloused, probably as a personal defense mechanism. You know, I'll defer to the psychologist to evaluate that. But it was important for me to understand in moving these cases forward is to understand, you know, the stories from Watergate and Deep Throat. Follow the money, because that's really what it was all about. Follow the money, and you know, sometimes a mistake happens. A mistake happens, it happens, and that's one kind of case. There should be accountability, but that's not going to, you know, that's not going to motivate a jury, nor should it. But if there's a systemic problem where money is being brought in either from private dollars or from tax dollars, which is Medicare and Medicaid, and then it's just being kind of shifted out to make it look like we're not making any money, so we have to get more money. And in the meantime, it's done at the expense of the patients. That's tough. It's just another version of, you know, deny, delay, and defend. You know,
Mhm.
it's it's all about the money.
Yeah.
In
This is a solid lesson learned. I want to hear more lessons learned if you have, but I want maybe that's a natural place for us to ask you, because we're almost venturing into the realm of transparency / accountability. And so I want to bring Elder Care IQ that Elder Voice Advocates developed. And that tool, online search tool, enables to fairly quickly identify all the Minnesota Department of Health investigation reports that were completed, and they were and at the level of a specific setting that you may consider moving, or you moving your loved one to. So we wanted to ask you, also in light of some of the challenges in navigating MDH, Office of Health Facility Complaints website, what do you see as the potential value of that fairly new search tool in your mind, whether it's for you as a lawyer in the future, or for family members who are struggling to find, or at least to avoid, low performing and neglectful care settings?
I think that's huge. I mean, it's super huge. Um, Putting a person in a nursing home is one of the hardest decisions a family member will ever make. Nobody wants to do it. It's just they get to a point where they can't physically and safely care for their loved ones in the way they want. So they agonize over doing it. And then they agonize about trying to find the safest and best thing for the loved one. I mean, it's usually mom and dad. And I mean, no one is more important in your life. And so they need a tool to help evaluate whether these places are the right place for their family member. And you know, and there aren't many tools out there. And you know, the Minnesota Department of Health doesn't catch everything, but if they're catching bad stuff, those are red flags going up. And that means going in and asking questions, or looking and finding things and evaluating whether these homes are more than something that just looks pretty. Are they going to take care of mom and dad, or my spouse, or maybe a child that's been harmed and needs that kind of care? So it's absolutely huge for lay people, and a person who's not skilled in this world is going to pull their hair out trying to get through the MDH website. I mean, we, you know, years ago had to create our own databases because we couldn't do it any other way. Then we get to the part about a lawsuit. When you're trying to evaluate whether something is just this one-shot deal or whether it's a systemic problem, you have to look at what's going on and what has happened in the past. Because, like it or not, history is a big teacher on everything in life. And so if you have access to this information, then you can say, okay, are there flags out there that says this looks like a systemic problem? And then at that point, it comes to people like me to say, now we got to figure out why there's a systemic problem. But a tool that cuts all this stuff takes days of work out of the front end for a lawyer. I mean, we couldn't handle that many cases just because the amount of work it is to uncover hidden information is mind-boggling. Mind-boggling.
Mark,
Kris?
yeah, I'm just, that's the whole reason Elder Care IQ was created, and we're going to continue to deepen and the resources available there. You're touching on another issue too that I wanted to just talk about, and it's the shell game that's going on with too many of these bad actors. And we're starting to see national research where related party transactions are happening that, they serve the nursing home at inflated prices for their real estate business, for their other services, etc. Now, in Minnesota, we did just pass last session a nursing home data transparency issue. So it requires nursing homes to disclose financial and operational information. Hopefully, that's going to start to uncover exactly the sort of issues that you're talking about, but we don't have that in assisted living. And I'm so hopeful that we'll see that, because we have to have that kind of transparency. They're crying that they don't have the money. Well, let's prove it.
Well, I remember I had a client testified in the United States Senate on nursing home abuse situations, and I was there supporting her. And they had a very well-meaning economist testifying. And the guy didn't understand the industry. All he could do is understand the whole. I mean, he's looking through, this high-powered lens of a microscope and saying, well, these poor nursing homes aren't making money. Well, Joel and I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years digging into the financial records, starting with the cost reports and burrowing down through the cost reports, and then taking depositions. And then when we find out how certain things get categorized, we're saying, whoa, they're misleading the government. And the lawyers and accountants can get very creative. For example, the 9/11 Porsche is a business expense for a nonprofit to make it a nonprofit. And that was $1 billion company, nonprofit.
Wow. Well, moving on here a little, and thank you for your service. And have to say, I'm sorry to see you retire, but I understand. But
I'm still helping people and guiding
okay.
people. I'm just not in the trench anymore because I'm getting too old for it. But
Hey, Kris.
people
Kris,
call me,
I
I
wanted to let
advise
you.
them. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I said I'm guiding new lawyers in the industry. I'm kind of like the basketball player who becomes a basketball coach. It's and so I'm still doing that part. And so when people call me, I'll say, okay, I'll work with somebody and I know who the players are who do different things. I just, at a certain point in time, you have to pass the torch to the next generation and become the coach instead of the player.
Well,
Yeah.
tell me a little more about that, because that's exactly the question I was going to be asking. How do we encourage more young lawyers to go into this line of work? Because I don't see this issue going away anytime soon.
I don't know how you encourage more lawyers to it. I mean, they have to be. I mean, there's a huge financial commitment to handling these cases. You take a car wreck, you take 2 depositions, you got some filing fees. The cost of handling a nursing home case is astronomical. And, victims can't afford it. And lawyers almost always have to have a credit line with a bank to advance that. And the bank won't give them credit unless, they have assets. So, we had to put up our house and our retirement plan every year to fight these battles. So it's it's a hard thing to do. And when we have these billion-dollar companies throwing money hand over fist at defense lawyers to just try to wear down the people who represent individuals, a lot of individuals just don't have the stomach for it. There are people who do it, and I know who they are, and I work with them. And it's only been about, I don't know, 14 hours since the last time I talked to someone who called me for advice and guidance and strategies, and I do that. And it's probably been about 2 days since someone called me and said, help me get to another lawyer. But there aren't many people who want to do it because it's hard. Plus, you have to know a lot. I mean, you have to understand medicine. You have to understand the regulatory process. You have to understand the shell game and how it's worked. So you have to understand medicine, corporate law, administrative law, negligence law. And a lot of lawyers don't want to put the work into it. And then on top of it, you have to understand litigation procedure, which a lot of lawyers just do what everyone else does. And what I have done over my career and written a number of books on this is saying, if you know the rules, if you really learn the rules and study them, then those are the rules of engagement. You can be very successful. It could bring the temperature down, and you can hold the obstructionists accountable personally. So that works, but there's a lot of work that goes into this. And I wish I could motivate more people to do it.
So I wanted to make sure that this was fabulous. I'm glad you're sticking around at some capacity to be a resource for the community. I want to, could be a related question of what advice you have. Those are already entering young ones. But before we do that, I want to make sure that you covered what you see as the lessons that you learned, because we kind of verged away from that. I want to make sure that you gave us the responses there.
Oh, we've covered that pretty heavily, but the big lessons I've learned is, and the things I would share with new lawyers. Number one, know the rules, know the medicine, understand litigation, and learn it not by just seeing what everyone else does, because we live in a society, not just litigation, but just in general, where cheating is okay, as long as you win. It might be in sports, it might be in politics, it might be in litigation, it might be in personal relationships. So you have to learn on your own. You have to be curious. It's not about beating somebody up. This is not what it's about. It's about holding people accountable within the guardrails of the law. And sometimes there are cases that there's nothing you can do about. Sometimes there's a lot you can do. But if you know the framework and You try to keep the anger out of it and use your brain, play chess, not checkers. And you can make a difference, and you can go home at night feeling good about yourself. Or after
Mhm.
45 years of litigation, say, I made a difference. I've made a difference and I feel good that I did that. And yeah, maybe I could have made a lot more money doing something different, but I'm now going into the next chapter of my life saying, I made a difference.
Mhm.
There are nursing homes that are safer now. There are
Well,
bad players in jail now. There are families who feel like they've been heard. Those are the kinds of things that, when you get gray hair, you start thinking, God, that's a lot more important than I ever realized 40 years ago.
that's profound and inspiring, Kris.
I'm sorry, you tagged off to
I
me?
just wanted to say that what you just said is moving, it's inspiring, it's profound, and I appreciate your reflection. I think it's going to be meaningful to a lot of people, not just lawyers. I don't know where we're going here. Are we going to what took you by surprise, or Kris, you had something before that you wanted to ask?
Well, I have to tell you, you've had phenomenal success, and thank you. But what have been your disappointments in your career path?
Is this the nursing home world or all of my
Yeah.
career?
Well, all right. Kind of
Let's
the,
stick let's stick to long-term care.
I mean, sometimes you lose a case that you think you couldn't lose, and that hurts, that really hurts. Sometimes there are times, that, I mean, the most disappointing thing was a lot of my idealism of my youth. I grew up as a son of immigrants. I mean, they were the true American dream. I had this idealism, and the deeper I got into this, the more I realized that much of the ideals in humanity, in politics, in business aren't what the American dream that
Wow.
was taught to me. And that was really difficult. Uh, uh, and it made me pretty cynical. It made me pretty cynical. In time, I processed that and I learned how to handle it. And I learned how to view the world and my life with a different viewpoint. But just how things work and this flow of money thing was it was like ice water being dumped on you.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that. Shall we move to the question about at the general broad level, as we discussed prior to going on air here, any insights into the Minnesota assisted living sector or the assisted living with dementia care sector? And you can stay at the broad level, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Well, I think Kris has done some enormous stuff in the last 5 to 8 years in moving assisted living along. It continues to be very challenging, though. I mean, I think the Department of Human Services is a more transparent company or agency than the Department of Health, which I'm really happy about. You don't have as many of these kind of incestuous battles with them. I think assisted living, regulation is state level. It's the federal de minimis. The it's kind of the problem is assisted living isn't assisted living, it's nursing home light. That's the problem. And particularly these memory care units where, the marketing people will say, well, this is a assisted living. And we have a nurse 24/7. But what they don't tell you is a nurse is on a pager 24/7 and might be 200 miles away. You know, the dementia care is, one of the hardest things to run. But oftentimes they're staffed by a couple of 20-year-olds who really don't know what they're doing, and they're on their cell phone half the time. And so people really have to get a better understanding of what they're doing when they're putting people in a memory care unit and what that memory care unit is. I think is it really a memory care assisted living, or should they be in a nursing home? Because I see people in assisted living who have full medication management and transfer of 2 assists, and can't get out of bed on their own, and they can't eat on their own, and they call that assisted living. And what happens is a lot of the family members get seduced by the advertising and the flowers in the lobby and the pretty wallpaper, and they just assume the care is going to be given properly, and they assume that because this money has been spent on the visual appearance of the place, that the care is all going to be great. And I don't think it doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
And that's a hard thing.
Are you referring to incomplete, unfair, misleading, or even deceptive marketing practices in the assisted living sector?
I've litigated those, but part of it is just a perception. A perception is people say, this is a beautiful place. This looks like a hotel I'd like to stay in. And they don't understand that the care is not being delivered. And there are deceptive practices. My problem is the courts haven't been particularly helpful with me on that, because they've called it puffery, and puffery is okay. If they say we're going to give you medication every 4 hours and they don't, that's a deceptive practice. If they say we're going to give you great care and we've got a great staff, that's called puffery, and puffery is acceptable in our society.
Mhm, mhm. I want to be mindful of your time. With the eye to the future, any systemic changes you'd like to see in whether it's in the assisted living sector or long-term care in general? What are your thoughts about that? Maybe you already addressed that, and that's okay. You want to leave us with your thoughts, whatever you feel like.
I have the same thought about the nursing home, assisted living, and healthcare in America in general. The for-profit model, I don't think is the right thing. It's, in our 7th grade civics, the beauties of capitalism, it doesn't play out. When people start making money off of the harm to others, or and the measure of quality is not the measure of the care of what someone got, but the measure of stock value, the care falls apart. And that same model falls to the nonprofits, that at what point is something really a nonprofit? A nonprofit where executives are making $10 million a year? A nonprofit where the company buys Porsches and Mercedes? A nonprofit where money is just split off into foundations that are separate nonprofits. So they're not real nonprofits. So I think this whole concept of where the money goes is the challenge that we have to have. And you can over-regulate it, you can under-regulate it. But I think we have to revisit the model. And I'm going to tell you, I really don't know what the answer is. I can tell you that when I see the little small mom and pop shop in rural South Dakota, where they've had, the community members running this facility, and the town is all part of it. We don't see the problems there that we see when a real estate investment trust from another country buys up all the nursing homes or assisted livings and makes it part of their portfolio, just like 7-Elevens and gas stations and farms and hedge funds. Yeah, the way the place gets run is different. And really the quality of that care is going to come from the leadership. I've seen some nursing home chains here in Minnesota that they have some facilities that are hellholes that I've had to sue a dozen times. And then I have found other facilities owned by that same chain that I've never had a call on because the leadership within that home is completely different. And a lot of it is driven by, what are the motivations that are established for, the administrators, the directors of nursing, the CEOs, the CFOs. But we have to revisit how that works because, I think we work so hard on regulations on gate belts and light bulbs, and we're not focusing enough on, following the money. And that's what created a career for Joel and I. And I wish we would have worked ourselves out of a job, but it didn't seem to work. They just kept on going.
Could I add that I think insidious in all of this is our cultural ageism, our attitudes toward older adults. And it has allowed a perpetuation of this very subpar system to keep on and to thrive.
I give you an anecdote on that that's going to make you cringe. We had a Omaha Beach survivor who was in a nursing home, and he was starting to spiral and spiral and spiral. And the medical director of the nursing home told the family, you just have to accept that your dad is dying. And they're looking at him and saying, this has been happening in the last month, and it doesn't make any sense. And they, on their own, called an ambulance over the objection of the nursing home. And when they came, they instantly diagnosed an opioid overdose, gave him Narcan, and he popped out of it. And in the hospital, one of the great statements, and we actually have it in one of our books, he says, the Germans couldn't kill me on Omaha Beach, but the nursing home almost did.
Wow. Well, I want to, you mentioned a minute ago that when you go, I think you alluded to more rural communities, when the city is part of it, there's this fabric of community and people maybe grew up in the same place and know each other well. And I know there's exceptions, I'm well aware. That being said, I recently interviewed 50 ombudsmen from 32 states, and one of the clear trend that came up was that the project was about fear of retaliation when they voiced care concerns and filed mistreatment complaints. And many ombudsmen said that in their experience in rural communities, when there's this close fabric of community, of supportive community that is integrated into the care home, residents are much less fearful of retaliation. And with exceptions, but in general.
Exceptions. But, and that's not just nursing homes, it's just the whole concept of community. As we have community, we identify with the people, and people become human as opposed to numbers. And I think that's really important. And as I'm getting older, I'm just seeing how important it is for me to have a community to have coffee with, to go for walks on, to have discussions with. We have to have community so we can connect with people.
Hey, Kris, is that a good place to thank Mark?
Mark, we could go on, but thank you so much. Your insights are very, very meaningful.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time, your insights, and your service to the community for so many years, and sharing your knowledge and insights for others who will come, after you, who will come and serve in that role across the country and internationally. And so we really appreciate it. You and Joel too, Joel Smith, who's your partner in crime for many years. And so thank you for what you did, and thank you for continuing to be a resource for our community.
Thank you. It's my privilege.